The air in Sleepy Hollow, New York, on Halloween always carried a different kind of chill. It wasn't just the biting autumn wind sweeping through the Tarrytown lakes or rustling the ancient leaves of the old Dutch church cemetery. It was something deeper, a pervasive whisper of folklore and fear, a presence that thickened the already dense October fog. Dr. Elias Vance, a skeptical folklorist and professor of American studies, had come to Sleepy Hollow this Halloween with one goal: to demystify the legend of the Headless Horseman. His intention was to prove that the tale, while captivating, was merely a product of communal superstition and historical embellishment, an effective tool for tourism rather than a reflection of any genuine supernatural phenomena. Elias was staying at a quaint, historic inn, the Tarrytown House Estate, which, despite its modern amenities, still held the echoes of centuries past. The inn itself bordered the vast woodlands, rumored to be the very paths the Hessian trooper had once ridden. Every night, as he settled into his room, the rhythmic creaking of the old timber and the distant rustling outside his window seemed to taunt his rational mind, subtly undermining his unwavering skepticism. He knew the legends. He had read Washington Irving's classic, but he dismissed the eerie sensations as mere atmospheric suggestion. His research began in earnest, delving into local archives, colonial-era land deeds, and old church records at the John C. Hart Memorial Library. He wanted to uncover the mundane truths behind the myth. He interviewed local historians, the descendants of the founding families, and even the self-proclaimed psychics who made a living off the town's eerie reputation. Most offered nothing but tourist anecdotes or vague spiritual claims, which only fortified Elias's scientific resolve. However, during his third week, Elias stumbled upon an obscure collection of journals belonging to a forgotten local reverend, Jeremiah Thorne, dating back to the late 1700s. The journals detailed not just the local life, but also strange occurrences preceding the Revolutionary War, accounts of vanishing livestock, unexplained shadows, and a pervasive sense of dread that gripped the nascent community. Reverend Thorne mentioned a particular ancient stone circle hidden deep within the woods, where old pagan rites were once practiced by indigenous tribes long before the Dutch settlers arrived. These rites, he vaguely alluded, involved a sacrifice of light to the deepening shadow, always performed on the night of Samhain, which the new settlers called Halloween. This was a surprising deviation from the standard Headless Horseman narrative, which typically focused on the Revolutionary War context. Elias, intrigued, discussed his findings with his local contact, Sarah Jenkins, a passionate amateur historian who ran the Sleepy Hollow Historical Society. Sarah, a lifelong resident, was less skeptical than Elias, having grown up steeped in the town's legends. Her eyes widened when Elias mentioned the stone circle. "Professor Vance," she said, her voice hushed, "there are whispers, old tales, that the horseman isn't just a soldier. Some say he's a guardian, or perhaps a curse, tied to something far older than the war. A guardian of what, no one truly knows, but the legend suggests he was awakened, not merely created." Sarah brought Elias to a small, dusty corner of the Historical Society's archives, revealing maps that predated the Dutch settlement. One, meticulously hand-drawn, marked an area deep within the western woods as the shadows glayed, and depicted a crude circle of stones. Below it, a faded inscription read, "Where the veil thins and the ancient sleeps. Disturb not the silence, lest the darkness wake." Elias felt a prickle of unease. This was more than mere folklore. It hinted at something primal, something rooted in the very earth of Sleepy Hollow. He decided to find this stone circle. Sarah, wary but excited, offered to join him. Halloween night descended upon Sleepy Hollow with an unusual intensity. The fog, thick and swirling, seemed to swallow the light from every jack-o'-lantern. The festive clamor of trick-or-treaters soon faded, replaced by the howl of the wind and the rustling of unseen things in the deepening woods. Elias and Sarah, equipped with headlamps and a compass, ventured into the shadowed depths of the western forest. The air grew colder, the sounds of the town vanished, and an oppressive silence enveloped them. After an hour of arduous trekking, guided by the old map and a surprisingly persistent sense of direction, they found it. A clearing where colossal moss-covered stones stood in a rough circle, half buried in the earth. In the center, a single flat altar stone bore eroded carvings, indigenous symbols that Elias recognized as sun and moon motifs, but also darker, serpent-like imagery he couldn't quite place. The area was strangely devoid of wildlife. No chirping crickets, no hooting owls, just the eerie whisper of the wind through the bare branches. A large, gnarled tree, its branches twisted like skeletal arms, loomed over the circle, its base adorned with a cluster of decaying pumpkins, their carved faces distorted by time and rot, yet still managing to project a chilling presence. As they stood in the center of the circle, Elias felt an inexplicable pull, a deep, unsettling thrum beneath his feet. His scientific mind struggled to dismiss it. Sarah shivered. "This place, it feels ancient, Elias, older than anything in our records." Suddenly the ground trembled. A low, guttural growl echoed from the woods, so deep it vibrated through their bones. The headlamps flickered wildly, casting chaotic shadows that danced like phantoms. Elias, despite himself, felt a surge of pure terror. "What was that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Then, from the darkness beyond the stone circle, a shape emerged. It was colossal, dark and equine, but not quite a horse. Its eyes glowed with an infernal orange light, and instead of a head, jagged bone protruded from its neck. Mounted atop it, a figure in a Revolutionary War-era uniform, but headless, sat ramrod straight. In its gloved hand, it clutched a blazing carved pumpkin, its empty eye sockets glowing with malevolent fire. The Headless Horseman. Elias's jaw dropped. His carefully constructed skepticism shattered into a million pieces. This was real, terrifyingly, impossibly real. The horseman slowly raised the flaming pumpkin, its fiery gaze sweeping over them. The growl intensified, raw and primal. It was not a call for battle, but a warning. A territorial roar, Sarah screamed, pulling Elias back. "Run, Elias, run!" They bolted, scrambling through the dense undergrowth, the rhythmic thudding of the horseman's hooves echoing behind them, impossibly close. The sound wasn't of a normal gallop. It was heavy, resonant, as if the very earth shuddered with each stride. Elias risked a glance back. The horseman was gaining, its flaming pumpkin head casting monstrous, flickering shadows that seemed to distort the trees into grasping claws. He could see other pumpkins, glowing faintly, strewn along the horseman's path, almost guiding it. They burst out of the woods, stumbling onto the old cemetery grounds of the old Dutch church. The graves, ancient and tilted, offered little cover. The horseman, its speed undiminished, rode through the hallowed ground, its form momentarily translucent, shimmering in the ghostly light. It seemed to ignore the graves, its focus solely on them. They reached the church doors, locked and ancient. Sarah frantically tugged at the handle, while Elias braced himself, expecting the horseman to burst forth at any second. But a faint, ethereal shield seemed to shimmer around the church, an ancient sanctity that even the horseman hesitated to cross. It circled the church once, its guttural growl rumbling, before rearing its horse. The flaming pumpkin held high, and then, with a deafening whinny, it vanished into the fog. They collapsed, gasping for air, trembling from head to toe. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the chase. They were safe for now, but Elias's world had been irrevocably altered. The next morning, back at the Historical Society, Elias was a changed man. His theories lay in ruins. He recounted every detail to Sarah, who, despite her own fear, listened intently. The journal, the ancient rites. The horseman isn't just a ghost, Sarah. He's something else. Something connected to the land itself, awakened by the veil thinning on Halloween, Sarah nodded. The Reverend's journal, Elias. Sacrifice of light to the deepening shadow. What if the Headless Horseman isn't the primary evil? What if he's merely a symptom, a guardian of something even more ancient and terrifying that was disturbed? They returned to the archives, poring over the Reverend's journals with new eyes. Elias had dismissed much of it as religious fervor, but now every line seemed to hold a terrifying clue. The Reverend wrote of a great shadow that slept beneath the land, disturbed by the unhallowed tilling of the soil by the new settlers. The horseman, he theorized, was a cursed entity, born of this disturbance, tasked with guarding the slumber of the great shadow. But the journal hinted at a ritual performed by a splinter group of early settlers, not the Dutch, but a darker, more desperate faction, who sought to control the horseman, to bind it to their will. They believed they could harness the ancient power for their own gain. This ritual involved sacrificing not life, but identity, symbolized by the removal of a head to create a loyal, perpetual guardian. The Headless Horseman, then, was not just a Hessian soldier. He was the tragic result of a failed attempt to control a primal force, a soldier's spirit bound to an ancient guardian, forever cursed to ride. They realized that the commercialization of Halloween in Sleepy Hollow, the casual invoking of the horseman's image, the multitude of carved pumpkins illuminating the town, all of it was inadvertently fueling the curse. The Reverend's journals spoke of lights offered to the shadow, suggesting that the horseman drew power from these celebratory yet superficial tributes. Every glowing jack-o'-lantern, every ghostly costume, every enthusiastic cry of "Happy Halloween" was unknowingly feeding the entity that haunted the town. Elias felt a profound sense of dread. His very project, meant to demystify, had perhaps aggravated the situation. He now saw the Headless Horseman not as a mere spectral soldier, but as a tormented entity, a tragic figure caught between worlds, an ancient curse given a modern, horrifying manifestation. The horseman's pumpkin head wasn't a random, gruesome detail. It was a perversion of the traditional harvest symbol, a mockery of the warmth and light of the harvest festival, transformed into an instrument of fear and eternal vigil. The horse's infernal orange eyes and the horseman's flaming pumpkin head were direct manifestations of this dark energy. They decided they had to warn the town. But how? Elias, the academic, now had to advocate for the very supernatural phenomena he had spent his life debunking. Sarah, ever practical, suggested they start by advocating for a different kind of Halloween, one that respected the ancient traditions of honoring the dead and the spirits, rather than merely celebrating fear. They proposed a silent vigil of remembrance for the next Halloween, encouraging dim lights, reflective ceremonies, and a temporary cessation of the usual boisterous festivities. The town council, skeptical of Elias's wild claims, initially dismissed their suggestions. But Sarah, using her deep community ties and the Reverend's journals as historical evidence, carefully edited to omit the more outlandish supernatural details, managed to sway public opinion. The legend, she argued, was being cheapened, losing its true historical and cultural significance. A more respectful, somber approach was needed. The following Halloween, the atmosphere in Sleepy Hollow was noticeably different. Fewer elaborate decorations adorned the houses, and the streets were quieter. People gathered in small groups, holding lanterns, not for trick-or-treating, but for silent remembrance. There were still carved pumpkins, but fewer, and they were placed with a sense of reverence, not just festive display. That night, Elias and Sarah returned to the stone circle, armed with no more than their courage and a desperate hope. They placed a single unlit pumpkin in the center of the altar stone, a symbol of humility and respect rather than defiant light. They whispered prayers for peace, for the Headless Horseman's tormented spirit, and for the great shadow to rest. As midnight approached, the ground began to tremble again. The familiar guttural growl echoed from the woods, but this time it felt different, less enraged, more mournful. The horseman emerged from the shadows, its infernal eyes still glowing orange, its flaming pumpkin head still held high. It rode towards the stone circle, its hooves making no sound on the consecrated ground. It stopped at the edge of the circle, its spectral horse snorting. The horseman looked at them, then at the unlit pumpkin on the altar. Its fiery gaze lingered as if contemplating. The air grew intensely cold, then slowly began to warm. The oppressive silence lifted. A gentle breeze rustled through the leaves. The flaming pumpkin in the horseman's hand flickered, then dimmed, becoming just a normal, unlit, carved pumpkin. The orange glow in its horse's eyes softened, and then, with a nod that seemed almost respectful, the Headless Horseman turned its spectral steed and slowly rode back into the woods, vanishing into the night. It did not ride with the furious, tormented energy of the past, but with a quiet, almost peaceful dignity. Elias and Sarah looked at each other, tears streaming down their faces. They had done it. They had appeased the ancient curse. From that day forward, Sleepy Hollow's Halloween traditions slowly began to shift. The commercialism faded, replaced by a deep respect for the town's history and its lingering spirits. The legend of the Headless Horseman remained, but it was no longer a tale of mere terror. It became a story of redemption, of a tormented guardian finally finding a measure of peace through understanding and respect. And Elias Vance, the once skeptical folklorist, became the town's unlikely advocate for the unseen, a testament to the power of belief and the enduring, tangible presence of the ancient past, especially on Halloween night, when the veil between worlds thins and the legends truly come alive. And every Halloween, a single unlit pumpkin would be placed at the stone circle, a silent offering, a gesture of peace, ensuring the Headless Horseman's ride remained a watch, not a hunt.